Hi everyone. Today is lesson 2 of the fraction series, but wanted to remind you what we did in lesson 1. And so in lesson 1, we learned what a fraction was, and we got some vocabulary. But in lesson 1, we learned that a fraction tells us part of a whole, and the bottom number tells us how many pieces the whole is cut into, and the top number tells us how many is used or not used. So if you have a pizza, this was my example in lesson 1. If you have a pizza and it's divided into 4 pieces, that means the bottom number of your fraction is 4. And then if you eat one of those pieces, then your top number is 1. And so you've ate 1/4 of that pizza. So that's what a fraction is. That's what we learned in lesson 1, and we learned some vocabulary. So if you'd like to see that lesson, go back to lesson 1 and watch that video. Now, in this lesson, we're going to learn what multiples are. And now this is something you have to know to be able to reduce fractions. So that's the reason we're going to do multiples today. And then we're going to do a couple of other things. But the first thing we're going to do is multiples. And so a multiple, and this can be one of the vocabulary words, but that's just the answers to multiplication problems. And so when we do that, and I just want you to understand that the answer to a multiplication problem is called the product, but it is also a multiple of one of those numbers. So in your vocabulary section, remember vocabulary is in the back of the book. We're going to write a few vocabulary. A multiple, let's see, a multiple is a number, so this is my vocabulary. Okay, a multiple is a number that can be divided by another number my writing is getting bad, without a remainder. So that's what a multiple is. So put this in your vocabulary section. So pause the video if you need to write this. Okay, so let's look at a couple of multiples. So let's take the number 5 and let's find the multiples of 5. So if you look at it, like I said, it's the answer to multiplication problems. So we're going to do the 5. So 5 times 1 is 5. 5 times 2 is 10. 5 times 3 is 15. 5 times 4 is 20. 5 times 5 is 25. And you can go on and on and on. So that's the multiples of 5. Okay? So let's look at 3. The same thing. 3 times 1 is 3. 3 times 2 is 6. 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times 4 is 12. 3 times 5 is 15. And 3 times 6 is 24. And you can keep going. So that is the multiples of 3. Let's try a harder one, okay? But if you know your multiplication tables, you should know all of these. That's why I always tell my students the easiest way to do math well is to know your multiplication tables, okay? So let's try 12. 12 times 1 is 12. 12 times 2 is 24. 12 times 3 is 36. 12 times 4 is 48. 12 times 5 is 60. And we can keep going. So, the reason that we need to know multiples is to learn how to find equivalent fractions. So we're going to put what an equivalent fraction is in our vocabulary section. So go to the back again and let's write the vocabulary equivalent fractions. Oh Lord, I forgot how to spell equivalent, sorry. Okay, an equivalent fraction is a fraction, wait a minute, no. Equivalent fractions are fractions that have different numerators and different denominators, but are equal in value. So equivalent fractions are two fractions, three fractions. You have a lot of equivalent fractions, but they are fractions that have different numerators, the top numbers, and different denominators, the bottom numbers, but are still equal. They still have the same value. So pause the video if you need to continue to write this. Okay, now in lesson 1, if you remember, or if you haven't seen it, you probably need to go back and do that one. But remember, in lesson 1, we had the pizza that was divided into 4 pieces. And if you remember, I said, what if you ate 2 of those pieces? Not just 1, but 2. So our bottom number is still 4 because it's still divided into 4 pieces. But this time you ate 2 of those. Now, if you look at your pizza, you can tell that you have eaten the half of it, right? So 2/4 is equal to 1/2. So even though the numbers are different, they are equivalent fractions. Now let's talk about how you will find equivalent fractions. Okay, so let's say that we have the fraction 2/3, and we want to find an equivalent fraction to that. So we need to find multiples. And the way that we do that is we say both numbers, top and bottom numbers, times the same number. So if we were going to find an equivalent fraction to 2/3, we can say times 2 on both top and bottom. So that would be 4/6, which is an equivalent fraction. Now we could also say 2/3 times 3 on the top and the bottom, and that would be 6/9, and that is also an equivalent fraction. So we can find an equivalent fraction. So let's do a couple, and let's see if we can find equivalent fractions. So let's say we have the fraction 5/7. And just like before, now, I don't know if y'all know this, but if you just put a dot like that, that's just like putting a time symbol. So I'm going to put dots from now on. It's just easier. So if we say both top and bottom times 2, which would be 10/14, that's an equivalent fraction. How about if we did times 5, which would be 25/35, and that is also an equivalent fraction. So you can say the top and the bottom number times almost any number to come up with an equivalent fraction. It's just usually easier to do smaller numbers. Now, sometimes, and you will see this a lot in a lesson, you will see a problem like this. 2/3 equals something over 15. And you'll usually see a question mark on top. And so you have to find what that question mark is. And so what you're going to do is you're going to say 3 times what? 3 times what gives me 15? And we know that 3 times 5 gives us 15. So that means we're going to say whatever, we're going to also multiply the top number by 5. And so our question mark is equal 10. And so our equivalent fraction is going to be 10/15. Now, you might see it like this. So here's another problem. 4/5 equals x over 10. Now that's just like a question mark if you see that x. That's what that question mark is. I mean, that x is a question mark. So you're looking for what that x is equal to. So you would say 10 times what gives me 10? 5 times what? Sorry, 5 times what gives me 10? So we know that's 2. So we're going to multiply the top by 2. So x is equal 8. And so our equivalent fraction is going to be 8/10. Okay, so let's do a couple. So let's say we have 7/9 equals x over 27, and 2/5 equals x over 20. So pause the video and do those two problems real quick and see if you get them right. So pause your video. Okay, so let's see if you got your answers right. So 9 times what is 27? We know that that's 3. So we're going to say 3 here. So x is equal 21. So our equivalent fraction is 21/27. Okay, did you get that one right? Let's try the other one. 5 times what gives us 20? We know that's 4. So we're going to do 4 on the top. So x is equal 8. So our equivalent fraction is 8/20. Okay? Now, I'm going to give you a few more. And, well, let me show you this. One more thing. If you have another one, and this time it's the x is on bottom. Does that change anything? Not really. You're still doing the same thing. This time you say 4 times what gives me 8. And so we do the same to the bottom. So our x is equal 10. Now, most of the time, that's how you'll see it. But let's say that you see your x here. I'm trying to remember what I did. And you have 14 over 10. I think that's what I did. This time, it's backwards, isn't it? And so what you might have to do is you might have to say, instead of what times 14, okay, you can, because you know that this is 2, right? And so you know this is going to be 2, so you're going to say what times 2 gives me 10, so our x is equal 5. You can also divide. You can say 14 divided by what gives me 7, so you know it's 2, and so you can divide this way, and you know it's 5. It doesn't matter which way you do it, it's whichever way is easiest for you, okay? So some of your problems might be like this, some might have the x on top, some might have the x on bottom, but it's all pretty much the same, okay? So I'm going to give you a few more problems. And let's see if you can do these. Now that looks pretty big, but it's pretty easy. So just say what times 10? 10 times what gives you 90? That's pretty easy. I'm going to give you a couple more, and then I'll move out of the way. Okay, so pause the video so that you can do those problems, and then we'll check your answers. So pause the video. Okay, let's check your answers. 6 times what gives us 24, so we know that's 4. So we're going to say 4 here. I really didn't give myself a lot of room, did I? So x here is equal 4. So our equivalent fractions is going to be 4 over 24. On this one, you could say 9 times 2 equals 18. So what times 2 gives me 16? So we know that that's going to be 8. So x is equal 8. So our equivalent fraction is 8/9. On this one kind of looks big, but like I said, it's not that hard. 10 times what gives us 90? So we know that's 9. So we're just going to say times 9 here. So x is equal 45. Because we know that 5 times 9 is 45. So our equivalent fraction is 45 over 90. So that's pretty big numbers, but it wasn't hard, was it? You just had to do the same thing, okay? So let's look at this one. 8 times what gives us 24? So that would be 3. So we're going to do 3 here. So x is equal 12, and our equivalent fraction is going to be 12 over 24. Here, we're going to say times 5 times 5. So x is equal 5, and our equivalent fraction is 5/10. Now, like I said, this one looks kind of rough, doesn't it? But it's not at all. This one's probably the easiest one because 4 times 1 equals 4, correct? So what times 1 gives us 100? So it's just the same thing. So x is equal 100. So our equivalent fraction is really not even equivalent. It's the same thing, isn't it? It's equal. So those are the answers. Make sure that you got those correct. If you did not get those correct, leave me a message. Remember, you can go to studieswithmisscolette.wordpress.com, and I'll have that in the description, and you can leave me a comment or a message, and I will try to answer your questions there. If I can't, I'll try to set up a time to FaceTime with you, and we can work on some more problems to make sure you get it right, okay? So I'll see you in lesson 3. Bye.